So what we're working on now is how the education of the electorate affect politics in America. And when we look at education, we again can break things down um, demographically. But when you look back even to our founding fathers, Thomas Jefferson said, "Enlighten the people generally, and tyranny and oppressions of body and mind will vanish like evil spirits at the dawn of day." So the more we know, the better off we're going to be. The educated voter is a much better citizen, quite frankly, than the uneducated voter. And so we know that we constantly, as a nation, aspire to higher education. Uh, but it's kind of startling when you actually look at the numbers of graduates. Only 50%, slightly less than 50%, I believe, of adults went to college, and 30% of whites are college graduates, 20% of African Americans are college graduates, and 14% of Hispanics currently are going to be college graduates in the studies that we've seen. So education definitely plays a role in the way people are going to vote. The same thing, by the same token, age is a huge factor. When you look at America, we have had a birth rate that has continued to slow down, and through modern medicine and better nutrition, the graying, they like to call it the graying of America, which I model very well, thank you, is a very real figure. Currently, 13% of our population is over the age of 65. And by the year 2020, it'll be over 15%. And by the year 2050, 20% of America is projected to be what we consider senior citizens. This is important because while only 13% of our population are senior citizens, they command 36% of the total medical expenditures in the country. So that means that basically everybody that's younger, and certainly as we continue to see the development and implementation continue to advance in the Affordable Care Act, that means that younger, healthy people are going to be paying for the senior citizens and their medical bills. Lifestyle effects are important. So for age, as people become middle-aged, as they work their way to late 30s and into their 40s, we've seen that historically they tend to become more politically conservative. We know that at the age of 25, basically from 18 through 25, they're at their peak as far as how liberal they're going to be as voters and in their lifestyle as well. As we as a population, we as individuals age, we tend to become more politically conservative, we tend to be less mobile, and we become more politically engaged. I think in many cases, it's as if it seems to matter to us more so. Young people, as we said, are more liberal, much more mobile and willing to travel and do things, and a lot less concerned about whether or not the government is going to be able to provide services to them. There are also what we call, when we deal with age and politics, there are also what we would call or characterize as generational effects. And two examples that come to mind are the generation that went through the Great Depression and then World War II, which many often call the greatest generation. They definitely, after living through those experiences and those hardships and trials as a generation, they definitely had their views on life, on politics, on lifestyle shaped by going through those trials. And by the same token, if you look at Americans that went through 9/11, their thoughts and what life was like, as you talked with with them, what was life like in America before 9/11, and how has it shifted and changed since 9/11? So definitely generational effects come into play when we deal with age and politics as well. The fifth section of chapter 4 talks about and is really centered on how much do we own? Having ownership, having wealth, how does that impact the the uh, the voters, and how does it impact politics? Well, wealth and income definitely play a role. We can see that, and by the way, we're on basically living in more or less the wealthiest nation on the planet, and so it's always been startling to people to see uh, the lifestyle that's lived. What does it mean to be? What does it mean to be poor or live in poverty in America? Poverty in America might mean that you have $100 sneakers and have a flat screen TV uh, and many other amenities, frankly. So it's a lot different than poverty that we see in other parts of the world. Of course, to be fair, there are homeless people in America. There are people that are going hungry, including children that go hungry in America. So this in no way is to make light of poverty or those that live in poverty in America. We do see poverty run the gamut from those that are hungry and homeless all the way up through people that live with income below the poverty level, yet still have quite a bit of material possessions, if you will. And so that's one of the things that really stands out. And then, of course, all the way up to people like Donald Trump and Steve Jobs and Ross and all these other people that they're billionaires. They, of course, are what most of us think of, and probably what most of the world thinks of when they think of America and wealth. Wealth and income and the differences between the two. As we mentioned in the beginning of the chapter, when you look at the last election cycle, where the comparison between or the contrast, I should say, between the 1% and the 99% was really one of the themes of the political season at that time, and how Wall Street seemed to be flourishing and was flourishing, yet on Main Street, people were hurting. These are definitely themes that can lead to conflict as well, not just maybe differences politically, but can even lead to open conflict as well. Other than race, income might be the single most important factor in explaining views on issues, your partisanship, and even your ideology as a voter. It has been characterized this way, and to an extent, it is fair to say that on average, most people of wealth lean Republican, and most people that are poor lean towards Democrat. However, there has been a trend in the last 12 years to extreme wealth now aligning itself with the Democrat Party as well. That is not a reflection of the Democrats' values changing or their fight for the common man and the poor man to have a better life changing at all. It's actually more of a reflection of the top half of the 1% recognizing that power is centered in the Democrat Party on a national level, and to maintain their position of wealth and status, it's better for them to become supporters of that power and to continue to see their wealth grow and flourish on Wall Street, while most of us, unfortunately, struggle on Main Street. So this is something that both parties have to wrestle with. When it comes to occupation, you can also see distinctions and how politics can affect both sides as well. Uh, what occupation do you have? How does that occupation affect your abilities as far as being a voter, and what your decisions are going to be as voters? When we look at occupation, um, we have to analyze the history of our country and its development economically, and recognize that we are living in a post-industrial society. We know all about the Industrial Revolution, and we also know that we are much more of a service industry related economy now. We do not rely on heavy industry. In fact, most of our industries long since have moved overseas. So being post-industrial means that knowledge is in fact the organizing device of this era. Uh, this society then has greater affluence and wealth, and the class structure is a lot less defined along the traditional labor versus management line. So the dynamic is changing. It should be noted, however, though, as we wrestle with unemployment and other issues that economies all wrestle with, what we are finding is that it's frankly jobs that we have long been looked at as labor heavy, labor related jobs today, because there is a lack of people that are able or are even willing to do them. They can command salaries into six figures, well into six figures, just by doing things such as welding, for instance, where we just don't have, they're just not around. And so while we have a lot of people hoping to find jobs in offices and jobs that have nothing to do with hard work per se, that's physical, more and more, because of how hard it is to find those people, you might find that you could make a lot more money, frankly, being a welder than you can working in an office somewhere. This also then lends itself to socioeconomic status. And in America, most Americans classify themselves, when you ask, as middle class. Very few of them are just going to come right out and say, no, we are from the lower class or poor. And surprisingly, quite a few are reluctant to call themselves upper class or wealthy. More often than not, a large percentage of Americans would much prefer or much rather say, yes, our family is in the middle class. Now, they might qualify that and say, yeah, we're very, we're well off, we're comfortable middle class, and that's okay. It is an interesting contrast that we in America might say middle class, but in most of the industrialized nations in Europe, they won't use the term middle class. They like to use the term working class, and they like to talk about a ruling class and a working class. So that probably stems from the level of socialism that they have in their system, and how much Marxist thought has infiltrated and influenced their lifestyle and the way they think. More and more, frankly, we see that happening in our country as well. And so, for instance, while many might look in our country, when you compare these socioeconomic status and you combine that with work, very often we might look and assume that if somebody is a plumber, oh, that's an occupation that, or a trade that might not have the same status and clout as being a teacher.
Teachers, please excuse the interruption. The varsity soccer game has been canceled for today. Again, the varsity soccer game has been canceled for today. Thank you.
And so the teacher might hold a higher socioeconomic status and yet not be paid uh, quite the same amount, and in some cases for a master plumber, be paid well under the amount of a plumber. And so all of these things contribute to having an impact on the political landscape of our country. And the last thing that we do is, while we've looked at so many differences, it's important to note that one of the aspects of our success has been that we have been considered a country that's united through our diversity. And for so many years, we wanted to look at America and compare it to a melting pot. That thought is changing, and more people, as they come to our country and settle in, are rejecting the concept of melting or blending into anything. And in the last decade, we in fact have not had unity in our diversity. More and more, we see just diversity and struggle in between groups, whether it be racial or it be along lines of socioeconomic status as well. We have become a country that really is wrestling with class warfare. And hopefully, in this next election cycle, we can put aside those differences and begin to see the commonalities that we share as we work our way back towards unity in a land of diversity.